Okay, with, you know, with Judge Nakamura and with the discussion that we've been having with him and war crimes and transcripts that you've read, in the latest hearing that has taken place, he took judicial notice of the protest and demand of the UN protest that you filed at the UN. What impact does that have?
Well,
or does it?
it really doesn't. What you're referring to, and for the audience if they don't know, on August 10th, I was in New York City at the United Nations, and I was able to file a protest and demand against 173 countries with the General Assembly. And that protest and demand was accepted as a state, meaning a state under international law is a country. Some people sometimes hear the word nation state, you know, but a state is the term used in regard to countries. So it was accepted as a state because if Hawaii was a part of the United States of America, it was the 50th state of the Union. Okay? This court, I mean the president of the General Assembly would not have accepted the protest because that would be a direct violation of U.S. sovereignty. Because the United States is the entity that actually has supposed authority over Hawaii. And if I'm up there claiming it doesn't have authority, but yet, according to the law, it is a part of the United States, this General Assembly, the president, cannot accept that protest. It'll be like entertaining a secessionist movement of a country. You know, it's like somebody in Great Britain who's trying to break away. Let's say the Scottish are trying to break away from Great Britain and become their own country. If they file a protest that they're claiming to be occupied by Great Britain with the General Assembly, well, the General Assembly cannot accept that protest if Scotland is still a part of Great Britain. Because if they accept it, what they're doing is they're intervening in the internal affairs of Great Britain, trying to deal with its own internal matters. So when the protest was filed, it was very important to ensure that it was filed as a state or nation state and that we are not a part of the United States. So when it was accepted, on the face of it, I received word that it also met the requirements needed under Article 35, subsection 2 of the UN Charter, which says a state which is not a member of the United Nations can file an issue with the General Assembly. They verified Hawaii to still be a country. So that is just added evidence that is coming out. Yeah? Now, when you apply that to Nakamura, Judge Nakamura's case, well, that is just more evidence that Hawaii is not a part of the United States. And the problem Nakamura has, he's in Hawaii. He's not in the United States. And if he's in Hawaii and he is relying on the Statehood Act for his protection as if it authorized him to have authority in Hawaii, well, what he's doing is he's not only committing a war crime, but he's relying on a war crime called the Statehood Act. The problem is there's no treaty. Can't get around it, you know? And I think that's where they're getting caught. Because now that this information is coming out, people are getting caught. Now, we're not in the same situation as World War II. Belgium is occupied by the Nazis. You can clearly see who are the Germans. They're speaking a different language. Yeah? They're wearing uniforms. Our situation is so different, but yet so the same. Yeah? Usurpation of sovereignty. Difference in the fact that Judge Nakamura, he's not a Nazi. Judge Nakamura, probably born and raised in Hawaii, family here, but that doesn't excuse him. From a law standpoint, he committed a war crime, even though if he believes he's correct.
Well, I thought it was interesting that he would take judicial notice of the protest and demand of the UN recognizing the Kingdom of Hawaii as a sovereign state, and then at the same time say he still has jurisdiction, you know.
But that's just an
and his understanding that the Kingdom of Hawaii still exists,
But see, that's really just an extension of the original war crime that he denied after taking judicial notice of the executive agreements, which are treaties.
Right.
So that's why I said it really doesn't matter. If anything, it's added evidence of him committing a war crime. That's what it is. So the fact that he would take judicial notice of the protest and demand that was filed, all he's saying is it's irrefutable. It was accepted by the General Assembly. Now, if it was accepted by the General Assembly can only accept protests from states, which are independent countries. So it's just another example of him not giving you a fair trial.
You know, I watched, you know, in your World Court case, you show a 3-minute clip of, you know, important sections in that World Court case, and you say that, you know, why would the occupier admit to their occupation? Because then they would know that they're, especially here in Hawaii, that they're illegal. Can you comment on that?
Well, it's like you're kidnapped. And before you get released, you're trying to talk to the kidnapper to try to get him to admit he's a kidnapper. It doesn't really matter. Because it's not what the kidnapper says or doesn't say, but rather the actions taken by the kidnapper that constitutes kidnapping. So, when you bring these issues up within courts, it's not an issue of winning a case, because you can't win in a case in a court that legally doesn't exist. What you can do is provide evidence that this court is illegal and doesn't exist, and I'm not getting a fair trial. See, so that is more of a defensive move than an offensive move. So you are defending yourself from a court claiming to have jurisdiction when it is clear that the evidence is overwhelming. It doesn't have jurisdiction. The proper court that would have jurisdiction would be what we call an Article 2 court, which is a federal court that administers the laws of an occupied country. That's actually a U.S. federal court. They actually have those type of law, those type of courts. They do. In fact, after World War II in Japan, when General MacArthur was occupying Japan, they were administering Japanese law, and Article 2 courts were created by executive order in Japan administering Japanese law. So this is not foreign under U.S. law. It's actually, there's precedence. So you can't get around the fact that these courts in Hawaii cannot exist if, one, the Statehood Act has no effect beyond the borders of the United States without a treaty. And if they are being imposed in a foreign country because they don't have force and effect beyond the borders, then that falls under a war crime called usurpation of sovereignty. Now, the constitutional law aspect and the usurpation of sovereignty heading, it was all created by the United States. So this is not like some other country came up with this theory. It applies right here. And that's been part of my research on my doctoral dissertation and law journal articles, and I'm currently sitting on doctoral committees myself that they're exploring more into these issues. The underlying point here, though, is once people get beyond the shock and awe that Judge Nakamura is really not a judge and that this court really doesn't exist, they need to look into how do you fix the problem. So how can Judge Nakamura fix this problem? Because if he doesn't, and he keeps moving along this path, oh, he's committing war crimes. In fact, there are 3 complaints already against him by 3 other individuals, including yourself, that was sent to Geneva, the United Nations Human Rights Commission. How can he fix this problem? See? Now, in my doctoral dissertation, and people can go to hawaiiankingdom.org. So hawaiiankingdom.org, they can download my dissertation. Chapter 5 covers how do you begin the transition, and basically how you fix this problem, which it may seem so complex, yeah, so sophisticated, so overwhelming. In fact, it's quite simple. See, whenever you deal with situations, yeah, you're looking at people either They're either people who are affected by decisions made, or they're the decision maker. So decision makers can make a decision where people are affected. The point is you gotta identify who's the right decision maker. Well, for Hawaii, the Pacific Command, the 4-star admiral is a direct extension of the President of the United States. This 4-star admiral represents the President in foreign relations. He is responsible for administering Hawaiian law, according to these treaties between the Hawaiian Kingdom and the United States. He's also required to administer Hawaiian law according to the Hague Convention of 1907. Field Manual 27-10 outlines how you do that. So it's all there. What he needs to do is to establish a proclamation, which I covered in my doctorate, to declare that all laws, to declare that a military government will be created, which only takes over the head of the state of Hawaii. The infrastructure stays the same, takes over the head, and begins to administer Hawaiian Kingdom law according to the treaties. Just complying. Next, he needs to follow up with another proclamation. Because what about all those laws that have been illegally imposed here since 1893 till today, which is what we are currently under? He can issue a second proclamation that says all laws illegally imposed in Hawaii, both federal and state, will be the temporary laws of the occupied country so long as these laws do not run contrary to Hawaiian Kingdom law. So, driver's license. Well, naturally, if the Hawaiian Kingdom continued to be in existence as far as a government, and its legislature was in existence, it would naturally have taken up the issue of driver's license. The whole world has driver's license. They would have taken that up. So a police officer can actually enforce that law, but his justification in enforcing the law is that he is doing it under necessity, because this law does not run contrary to Hawaiian Kingdom law. So nobody can accuse that police officer of committing a war crime. Now, judges could be put in the same position. Instead of waiting for this Pacific commander to issue the proclamation to resolve these problems, I have to be frank, he's not going to do it until after the fact. He's not going to do it, or she, whoever that head of Pacific Command will be, until everything blows up. It'll be like Hurricane Sandy coming through the East Coast, tearing up everything, and then they try to fix it. I don't want to wait for that. Now, what I covered in my doctoral dissertation, well, that's how you're supposed to do it. But it doesn't mean he's going to do it anytime soon. What do you do in the meantime? Well, in the meantime, judges are being reported for war crimes as a result of the non-compliance by the Pacific Command. They're being reported because they're relying on the statehood act. Others could be reported as well. How do you prevent that? Well, a judge can, under what is called the doctrine of necessity, which is a legal doctrine, can actually declare in his own courtroom that according to the evidence provided, it is clear Hawaii is not a part of the United States, and I have to take things into my own hands and basically declare that this court will administer all federal and state law so long as these laws do not run contrary to Hawaiian Kingdom law. Now he can have a hearing. See, all of a sudden he's taking the necessary steps under necessity to transform that court into an Article 2 court. So down the road, when the Pacific Commander issues the proclamation, it's only confirming what was already done. But it's not creating something after the fact when things were destroyed. So once that order is issued, let's say out of this court, that is now saying under necessity, I have to move for conviction on this individual for robbery. Okay, well, to carry out that sentence, the sheriffs now will then escort that individual to the cell block, and what they're doing is they're operating under a lawful order, because that lawful order was in compliance under necessity with Hawaiian Kingdom law and the Hawaiian Kingdom law on theft. And so let's assume the court refuses to do that, like Judge Nakamura did, and issues the order for eviction. Despite the evidence, this court doesn't have jurisdiction. Well, that order in and of itself is unlawful. That's an unlawful order. And if a sheriff or police or law enforcement enforces that order, what they are enforcing is an unlawful order. Now, I know for a fact that when I was in the Army, I'm a retired captain, you are not required to carry out an unlawful order. One example in the Army, if I was given an order to wipe out this village of civilians, I cannot carry out that order, not because I made a personal decision not to carry it out, but because of the Geneva Convention that says civilians are protected, they're not armed. I cannot touch them. So I would have to stand on my own and say, this is an unlawful order. Sir, with all due respect, I can't carry this out. And I'm not being insubordinate. I'm just following the rules. Can you please give me added information that provides me a better basis of carrying out this order so I know it's lawful? Now, I have to assume every order is lawful until I have evidence that shows it's not lawful. So I'm supposed to have carried out the order. But if I already know the Geneva Convention, I know civilians are protected, I can't carry out that order because it's unlawful. Now, I found that in the law enforcement, both sheriffs and police, they actually have that as part of, I believe, the standard of conduct, carrying out unlawful orders. And it specifically states in the standard of conduct that a law enforcement official, whether police or sheriff, whatever that standard is applied to, has every right to refuse to carry out an unlawful order. But they have to presume the order is lawful until they provide evidence that it could be unlawful and apprise that individual, his superior, that this, based upon the evidence, is an unlawful order. And the evidence of an unlawful order for eviction would be the sheriff's knowledge that Judge Nakamura basically denied this individual fair trial, but even more so, Judge Nakamura was reported to the United Nations Human Rights Commission for war crimes. So as a sheriff, I would have to sit back and go, let me call the United Nations War Crimes Commission and find out what is the status on this. Because if I carry out that order of a reported war criminal, then I become an accessory to a war crime myself, and I can be reported. Because they will be carrying out an unlawful order. Now, for a sheriff to alleviate himself from committing a war crime or being an accessory to a war crime, all he needs to do is find a treaty that Hawaii is part of the United States. If there's no treaty, then he can't rely on any order coming out of a court where evidence was provided that there is no treaty. Yeah? And I think what sheriffs can do to understand how political this thing has become and not legal is they need to read the transcripts of Judge Hara in Elaine Kawasaki's case. Because that transcript is very clear that Judge Howard knew that the evidence was clear, but he refused to grant the motion to dismiss because he felt he will be saying all courts in Hawaii are illegal, because he felt threatened. Now, what I found out from Judge Howard, he's a former JAG officer, staff judge advocate, Army, that's an attorney. That doesn't look well for him because he cannot claim ignorance. So I really don't understand why Judge Howard is doing this. I really don't understand why any of the judges are doing this. I think what they need to start to do is to ask, how do we fix this problem? Because they're in trouble. And it's not like people are threatening to report them for war crimes. They've already been reported. And now their actions will be affecting other people.
Yeah, I think your point that you brought out, where people need to understand that in an illegal system, all we're doing is we're presenting the evidence in an illegal system, knowing that the system is illegal, and the judges will, because they're making decisions and still ruling against us, but it's still laying the foundation, and the evidence is very important for people to understand.
Yeah, setting the record.
To set the record, because it's not a matter, because everybody is looking and saying, well, you know, we'd like to go into court and win. But when that court is illegal, like how you brought up earlier.
It's not an issue of winning
That's right.
or losing.
And people have got to understand that,
Yeah.
because initially, we thought that providing, strong and legal evidence that the judges would understand and be potent on their decisions. It didn't happen, and it's not happening.
Well, I think what a lot of people do when they make, the mistake that people do in these positions, they think that what is presented is a sovereignty argument. It's not. It's actually a legal position and a factual position. It's not part of the sovereignty movement. If anything, this has nothing to do with the sovereignty movement. I teach at the university. This is part of instruction. Students are learning this. I'm sitting on doctoral committees, they're researching this. So for judges and law enforcement and government officials to think this is a fringe group holding signs, no, not even. And I caution people, don't look at it that way. Do not look at it that way, because there are profound ramifications. The best thing to do is sometimes to hold off. Yeah? Not stop, just hold off and start asking questions. I've never seen a judge ask questions on how to remedy the situation given the information. I've only seen the attitude of them saying, well, I need to stop this, otherwise we're going to have chaos. But by doing that at the expense of a defendant who raised the evidence for his or her protection, so you're willing to throw that person under the bus to protect something that is illegal? That's crazy. Maybe you should hold off on that and get more information. Yeah. Why don't they get more information from the Supreme Court of the state of Hawaii? Why don't you start asking people what's going on and hold off on these issues, because what's happening here is a very, very serious matter. It's not a joke. In fact, I already had meetings with law enforcement officials already. Here on Hawaii, sheriffs, police officers, also sheriffs and police officers on the island of Oahu. Actually met with the police union, Shopo. Well, it's a very serious matter, because now law enforcement are being implicated in war crimes.